In 1956, I was expecting our second baby. We lived in Salt Lake because my doctor back in Idaho had said I would have trouble and I would need to have a specialist in Salt Lake. So he was glad I was moving down there. And he said, "You can't come to Idaho anymore until us after this baby's born because you're going to have problems." We had the RH factor, and it was before they had any treatment, not quite. They had started doing blood exchanges, and he needed two, our baby boy. And a doctor, the pediatrician was Dr.
Fischler. Is it Fischler?
Fischler. And he was young and new in town, and I was referred to him by the doctor in Idaho. And Dr. Meads, who was in the High Council in our state, did a lot of surgery and things for our little boy, but he didn't change the blood. Anyway, I had to be put down in bed because I kept going into labor, having a terrible time, and so I was put in the hospital the first part of November. And the doctor had told me he didn't think I would get a live baby. And if it was live, it wouldn't be healthy and well. And that was a shock to me because I was young and I'd never heard of all these things. We studied, my husband and I took biology together in high school, and we studied about the RH factor. And I remember raising my hand and saying, "Well, why would people get married if they had that?" And the teacher smiled at me. And anyway, it was a hard pregnancy, and I was in and out of false labor most of the time. And the night that I had to go in the hospital because I was in labor and I wasn't far enough along to get the baby, and I stayed all night, and the next day they let my husband take me home, and my little girl was gone. She was 2 years old, little over 2. And they had taken her to an aunt in Ogden. I wasn't notified or until she was all gone. I wasn't consulted about it. Anyway, then she ended up at my mother's in Idaho, and she was gone until Christmas, just before Christmas. And I was flat on my back in bed. And a week before Christmas, my husband had to have emergency surgery for an appendectomy. But when they got in there, they found a tumor. And I wasn't smart enough then to find out if it was malignant or benign. I'd never heard of those words. I was a country girl. Anyway, I was there alone, and my husband was working double shifts. He would leave about 7 in the morning, and he wouldn't get home till after midnight. So I was really alone, and I prayed a lot, and I counted. They used to wallpaper the ceilings and all, and I counted all the little squares on the ceiling over and over and over, and I prayed a lot. And we didn't use the phone then like we do now, so I didn't get to talk to my little girl or anything, find out how things were going. And my husband also had a paper route at that time. He had to have a part-time job and 2 part-time jobs, really. He'd go to work for the power company and work a double shift, and twice a week He would work right through a graveyard shift. He'd get off work at midnight, go right to Hotel Utah, where he parked cars and serviced cars, work, and then he would come home, and the nights he didn't work all night, he had to get up at 4 o'clock to deliver all those newspapers in a huge apartment complex. So anyway, it was touch and go. And that was just about the last straw when he had to have emergency surgery. And this fellow that he rode to work with, we were new in the ward. It was 21st Ward. And we didn't really have except Ron did. They put him in as finance clerk before we moved in. This Brother Hartley that lived in the ward had told the bishop about Ron and that he could do that. And so they had him put in there before we ever went to church there. And so he was busy with that too. But they let him come home. My parents came down when I called them and told them that he had just had surgery. And he was there for hours. This Brother Hartley had taken him right from work to emergency, and they said, well, we've got to do surgery on him. But I didn't know that till 3 o'clock in the morning. He says, I'm taking him to St. Mark's. And so we were close to St. Mark's Hospital. And he called me later and told me that he was going to have surgery. And I couldn't get up out of bed to go or do anything. And so I was there alone and just very upset. So about 3 o'clock in the morning, I called the hospital. And I told her who I was, the lady that answered. And I said, my husband's having surgery and I'm just crazy. And she said, oh yes, I know him. And she says, Dr. Meads is just coming down the hall and he will want to talk to you. And so that's when I found out about the tumor. He said, don't be so upset about an appendectomy. This is a blessing in disguise, because otherwise we wouldn't have found the tumor. And he said it would have been a big problem before long. And doctors didn't tell you much in those days. They kept things from you. Anyway, they let him come home on Christmas Eve day, just because it was Christmas. My parents had come down when I called them, brought my little girl, and tied a Christmas tree that my dad had got for the family, gone up on the hill and cut it down and tried it on top of the car, and he brought 2 live chickens. They didn't have time to kill them and clean them and cool them and everything. He put them in a gunny sack, both chickens, and brought them down and brought my husband's mother, my mother-in-law, and she was a wonderful person, to stay with me, because they had to go back home. My dad was a farmer and he had a lot of cows to milk, so he couldn't be gone very long, not even overnight. And they came and had that Christmas tree, and they put it up and decorated it with my 1 string of lights. It was a big tree. 1 string of lights and 12 little balls and icicles. And decorated the tree, and Mother made my favorite chicken dumpling soup. And she washed the baby clothes so they would all be fresh and clean. And my dad cleaned the chickens. And Mother baked the chickens. She made soup with one, and she baked the other one and put stuffing in it. So they had me fixed up for food for a while, and my mother-in-law stayed with me. And my husband came home from the hospital on Christmas Eve day, and someone tapped on the door later on in the day, and in comes our wonderful Bishop Valls. And I had not met him, but of course Ron knew him. And he had his wife with, and I still don't know her name. and 2 teenage daughters. And he said, I've brought my daughters and they're going to do any cleaning that you need done, like vacuuming and dusting, which they did. And he said, we will be back tonight with dinner. And by dawn, they came the next day, on Christmas Day too, with another dinner. One was a turkey dinner and the other one was a ham dinner. And all the makings with it. And she had 5 or 6 children. And Christmas, and so she was a busy lady. So that our little girl was so happy. I had put her things for Christmas away at Walmart, not Walmart, Kmart.
Woolworths.
In the spring, early in the spring, the trip I made to Preston, and I found out I was definitely pregnant. And I had put everything away. I had saved for a whole year, and I'd saved $20. And I got her Christmas with that, put it on layaway, and then it cost about $25. So I paid on it, and it was all paid for by fall, and they called and said, you'll have to come and get that out, it's paid for. So my husband loaded me in the car in the back seat one night and took me down after he had took a time off. And we went down before they closed, and he picked up the stuff, and he bought those 12 little balls that we had for the tree. We used my sister's one string of lights, and he bought a package of icicles. And so we felt pretty good about things, that we were blessed, very blessed. And our little girl was so glad to be home. And you don't think a 2-year-old would know anything about death or anything, but she did. And she thought I was dead, and they weren't telling her. And she was only 2. She was a little past 2. And anyway, I got her a Betsy Wetsy doll and a little tiny doll buggy and a little tiny fold-up, like a card table, but just a tiny one with 2 chairs, a little set of 10 dishes, and a storybook for $20. A little over, maybe. Might even have been up to 25, I don't know. Anyway, she played. She was so glad to be home with her mom and daddy. And Ron laid in the bedroom all day. He was sicker than a dog. And I laid on the sofa in the living room with her. And she played with those things that she got from Santa Claus, and was the best little thing in the world. And I thought I could have kept her home if they'd have just asked me. I would have kept her home. Anyway, that became my favorite Christmas. And my husband said, we're not ever going away from home on Christmas Eve again. We're staying home with our babies, which we did. So it became my very favorite Christmas.